Hi, everybody. Hello. I want to tell you about objective and phenomenological methods in consciousness studies with reference to spirit mediumship. In natural sciences, especially, but also in all of mainstream normal science, we expect a lot of objective methodology. And in fact, at this conference, we've seen a lot of great examples of it from people like Dean Radin. For example, controlled laboratory experimental designs. We sociologists and anthropologists use a lot of phenomenological methods in participant observation and in ethnographic interviewing, where we're trying to get people to talk about their views of the world. If we want an example in parapsychology, we could look at Pamela Ray Heath's article in 2000 in the Journal of Parapsychology, The PK Zone, a phenomenological study, where she has people talk about their mental states during their psychokinetic experiences. One of the great advantages of objective methodology, of course, is for uncovering mundane explanations and trying to eliminate those explanations to see if we really have an anomaly that needs to be explained. For example, Gary Schwartz, in the Afterlife Experiments, 2002, developed increasingly stricter protocols for testing spirit mediums' performance in a laboratory setting and contrasting them to a control group of guessers. We've got a lot of good objective data such as this in the areas of spirit mediumship, NDEs, apparitions or ghosts, and reincarnation, but there's still a debate as to whether we've got evidence for survival of consciousness after bodily death, rather than merely some kind of psi among the living, psychic abilities among the living. This is a very interesting debate. We're stuck for a specific mechanism that would explain either how psi or survival would work. Maybe the mechanisms are the same, but we would still like to know the source of the information from psi with a living person as opposed to psi from a spirit, let's say. There are interesting theories of hidden order that are consistent with the data. Look at Dean Radin, for example, Entangled Minds, 2006, and talking about non-local connections in quantum physics. Okay, here's an idea. Why don't we just get rid of all the objective methods and go to the phenomenological methods? Let's just ask spirit mediums if they're really talking to dead people, and that'll settle it once for all. Bad idea. I teach sociological research methods, and I am a fan of multiple methodologies and point out there are always advantages and disadvantages of all the methods. Now it's time for me to tell you how I've used phenomenological methods in studying spirit mediums. First of all, as a sociologist and an anthropologist, I see this all in terms of sociology of knowledge. And so the first question is, why do we even ask this question about whether there's survival of spirit in a scientific way? If you look in traditional Chinese culture, and you can get an example of this from my book, Chinese Ghosts in ESP, 1982, which has a section on spirit mediums, the Chinese perspective would ordinarily be that you take spirit mediumship for granted, and the question is whether this particular spirit medium is bringing through your grandfather. But in this society, science is the dominant legitimate way of knowing. Next point is that some people in this society put the phenomenological personal experience of consciousness ahead of the objective scientific perspective. Skip Atwater, who was director of research at the Monroe Institute for 20 years, told me in a recent interview that he has been spending a lot of time gathering evidence to demonstrate what he knows is, quote, obviously true, unquote. In other words, he uses both objective and phenomenological approaches. For the past 15 years, my wife Penelope and I have studied spirit mediums in the United States. This is our book, Guided by Spirit, A Journey into the Mind of the Medium, 2003. It's mostly a phenomenological approach, as you can tell from the title. Minds of mediums, asking them to describe their own process. And surprise, most of the 40 mediums we interviewed and the 82 mediums whose biographies I analyzed have been at least somewhat skeptical of the survival hypothesis. This is in the Western world, right? Nearly all mediums look for confirmations, that is, feedback that their readings are correct. Also, mediums often embrace a psi explanation for their readings. They'll say, that was just a psychic reading that I did, or I read that person's aura instead of getting the information from the spirit world like I was supposed to here in Lilydale. Now, here's a nice example of a confirmation that some people would say leans toward a survival interpretation, at least because it seems to eliminate telepathy among the living. The medium told the unknown sitter in a telephone reading, "Your deceased Aunt Ruth is here." Yes, I had an Aunt Ruth. "She wants you to have a ruby ring, her ruby ring. It's in a secret compartment at the back of the second drawer in her dresser, which is now in your mother's house." Nobody in the family knew anything about this ring, but they found it just where the medium said it was going to be and called her back. The medium was my wife, Penelope. An objective scientist would probably object to using Penelope's phenomenological report, especially since she's one of the authors of the book. To me, my knowledge of Penelope increases the validity of the account. Now, here's another zinger. By the way, zingers do not happen all the time. This case also erodes my academic respectability even further. I appear as a commentator in the TV documentary Ghosts of Gettysburg, which has been on national cable TV over 60 times. I know it's been on because I get all these emails, letters, and phone calls the next day. Before that show was produced, this was in 1995, Penelope took her first trip to Gettysburg and to Little Round Top on the Gettysburg battlefield on 2 consecutive days in early July on the anniversary of the battle. Now, Penelope knew little or nothing about the Northern General Joshua Chamberlain at that time, but she apparently channeled him on those 2 days. It seemed to be like an obsession case rather than possession, because she could see the battlefield as it was now, as it is now, and as it was then, and have a conversation with Chamberlain in her head. There were a lot of evidential details, such as she said he was trying to get a letter to Sarah, which turned out to be the name of his mother and also the name of his sister. And Penelope felt a pain. She had a difficulty walking because of a pain in her left hip and her right ankle, which we found out later were the 2 places that Chamberlain had been injured in the Battle of Gettysburg. Now, 6 years later, in 2001, I got an email from a woman who had seen the TV show, Ghosts of Gettysburg, and she told me that she thought the spirit of Joshua Chamberlain was trying to enter her body. And this happened about 100 yards from where Penelope had had her experience, and it was also in early June. This is the only obsession or possession case I've ever gotten from the hundreds of people who have contacted me when they want to tell me about their ghost experiences in Gettysburg. And at that time, Penelope's experience had not been published anywhere. Later on, I found out that Chamberlain often revisited the battlefield on the anniversary of the battle when he was still alive. Does he continue to visit the battlefield on the anniversary of the battle after his death? Did I tell you that other woman had that also in early July? And what kind of explanation do you need in order to explain this case in terms of super psi? Now, let's take the phenomenological approach one step further and demolish what little is left of my academic reputation, at least in sociology, if not in SSE. Participatory science. Participatory science involves the researcher moving away from objectivity at a distance and jumping right into the study itself. This is like Dr. Jekyll taking his own potion and turning into Mr. Hyde. Bad things happen to you, especially in the tenure committee. In sociology and anthropology, participant observation approaches participatory science. But you're not supposed to go native. I went native. I became a spirit medium. He was supposed to study spirit mediums, not become one. But I think this was the best part of my part of the study. What better way to do a phenomenological study than leap whole hog into the phenomenon itself? I think I still have a pretty good dose of skepticism anyway, because I really want to know what's going on. I study this stuff because I have a curiosity addiction, like everybody else in this room. And so for me to fool myself would be like cheating at solitaire. Like, what's the point? So I really do have, actually, the spirit mediums think I'm a skeptic, actually. Now, as described in Guided by Spirit, lo and behold, I've had zingers too. Not all the time, but lots of them. From a phenomenological perspective, I can tell you there is something going on here. I can't prove it's survival, even though it feels like it.